Nathan Cole stood in the great chamber of the Galactic Council and felt the weight of 100 alien eyes upon him. He had been Earth's ambassador for 3 years now. 3 long years of smiling when he wanted to scream. 3 years of bowing his head when every bone in his body told him to stand tall. The chamber was beautiful. He had to admit that much. Crystal walls rose toward a ceiling that showed the stars themselves. Delegates from 40 different species sat in floating chairs arranged in a perfect circle. Each one represented a world, a civilization, a people with their own history and dreams. And almost all of them looked at humanity like they were children who had wandered into a room full of adults. High Speaker Zorvan of the Velthrani stood at the center of the chamber. His species had blue skin and feathers instead of hair. They were old. Their civilization had sailed between stars when humans were still living in caves. They never let anyone forget this. The Council recognizes the continued growth of the human species, Zorvan said. His voice was smooth like silk, but Nathan had learned to hear the poison underneath. We are pleased that our youngest members show such enthusiasm. However, we must guide this enthusiasm carefully. Nathan felt his aide, Lieutenant Megan Shaw, tense beside him. She was young, barely 30, but she had learned quickly that the Council's kindness was never really kindness at all. The expansion of human colonies beyond the Sol system presents certain concerns, Zorvan continued. Younger species often lack the wisdom to manage multiple worlds. They spread too fast. They consume resources without thought for tomorrow. Nathan kept his face calm. He had heard these words before. Different versions, but always the same meaning. Humans were young. Humans were foolish. Humans needed to be controlled. The Kethmari delegate, a creature made of living stone, spoke next. We propose restricting human expansion to their home system. For their own protection, of course. Of course, Nathan said quietly. Megan looked at him with worry in her eyes. The Osurian delegate, Counselor Marathan, added her voice. Her species looked almost human, except for their silver skin and 4 arms. The restriction would be temporary, perhaps a century or 2, until humanity proves itself ready for greater responsibility. A century or 2. Nathan thought about that. His grandchildren would be dead before humanity was allowed to grow again. And even then, would the Council truly lift the restrictions? Or would they find new reasons to keep humans small and weak? The vote was quick. 32 species in favor of restriction, 6 against, 2 abstained. Humanity had no vote at all. They were too new, too young, too primitive. Nathan stood slowly. The chamber fell silent. Ambassadors did not usually speak after a vote. The decision was made. The matter was closed. High Speaker, Nathan said. His voice was steady, even though his heart was pounding. I must inform the Council that the United Earth government has been watching these proceedings closely. Zorvan's feathers rose slightly, a sign of annoyance among his people. The Council welcomes Earth's attention. We hope they understand that our decisions are made with their best interests at heart. I'm sure you believe that, Nathan said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small device. A message had arrived during the vote. He had read it 3 times to make sure he understood. President Linda Hoffman and Secretary of Defense Paul Greer had made their decision together. The result was unanimous. The United Earth government formally withdraws from all peace negotiations with the Galactic Council, Nathan said. Each word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. We will no longer participate in a body that treats us as subjects rather than equals. We will no longer accept restrictions on our growth, our movement, or our future. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. In the entire history of the Galactic Council, no species had ever walked away. The Council was where conflicts were resolved. The Council was where decisions were made. The The Council was quite simply the center of galactic civilization, and humanity had just told them they were leaving. Zorvan's feathers pressed flat against his skull. His voice lost its smoothness. Ambassador Cole, you cannot be serious. Your species depends on Council protection. Without us, you would be vulnerable to every threat in the galaxy. We will take our chances, Nathan said. You would throw away everything your people have gained? The trade agreements, the technology exchanges, the protection of our combined fleets? Nathan smiled. It was not a friendly smile. High Speaker, in 3 years of membership, humanity has received almost nothing from the Council except restrictions and insults. We have traded our resources for technology that was already outdated. We have sent our ships to serve in your fleets, while our own borders remained undefended. We have bowed and scraped and begged for scraps of respect. He took a step toward the center of the chamber. No more. Councillor Marathon rose from her seat. Ambassador, please, let us discuss this. Perhaps there are compromises we can reach. The time for compromise was before you voted to cage us in our own system, Nathan said. The time for discussion was before your people called us primitives and barbarians. The time for negotiation was before you treated our representatives like servants instead of equals. He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as he could. Some species looked angry. Some looked worried. A few, surprisingly, looked almost relieved. Humanity will remember how we were treated here, Nathan said. We will remember the votes against us. We will remember the insults and the condescension. And when the day comes that you need our help, we will remember that too. He turned and walked toward the exit. Megan fell into step beside him. Ambassador Cole, Zorvan called out, you are making a terrible mistake. Your species will regret this. Nathan stopped at the door. He did not turn around. Perhaps, he said, but it will be our mistake to make, our regret to carry, our future to build, not yours. He walked out of the chamber and did not look back. Commander Diana Price was waiting on the Endeavor when Nathan's shuttle arrived. She was a tall woman with gray streaking her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. Ambassador, she said, I received orders from Earth. We're going home. Nathan nodded. How soon can we leave? 20 minutes. I've already recalled all personnel. Behind them, through the viewport, Nathan could see the Council station growing smaller. Lights flickered in windows as news of humanity's withdrawal spread. He imagined the chaos inside, the arguments, the accusations, the scrambling to understand what had just happened. Let them scramble, he thought. Let them wonder. Let them finally, for once, think about humanity as something other than a problem to be managed. The Endeavor turned toward home. The stars stretched as the jump drive activated. Humanity was alone now. Alone, and surrounded by a galaxy that had never wanted them as equals. But Nathan Cole felt something he had not felt in 3 years. Hope. 5 years of silence. 5 years of darkness. 5 years of wondering. Councillor Marathon stood before the great window of her office and stared at the empty region of space that had once connected the galaxy to humanity. The jump gates were dark. No signals came through. No ships traveled in or out. It was as if humanity had simply disappeared. The latest intelligence report, her aide said, placing a tablet on her desk. Our agents have found nothing. Again. Marathon picked up the tablet and read quickly. Spy probes destroyed at the border. Listening posts detecting only static. Trade ships that ventured too close were turned away by automated defense systems that seemed to appear from nowhere. 5 years, she said quietly. What are they doing in there? Her aide had no answer. Nobody did. Across the galaxy, High Speaker Zorvan had stopped caring about the humans. They were gone. They were no longer a problem. Let them rot in their little corner of space. Let them destroy themselves with their primitive emotions and their foolish pride. He had more important matters to consider. The Velthrani trade empire was growing. New species were joining the council every decade. The galaxy moved forward, and humanity had chosen to be left behind. But Zorvan did not know what was happening inside human space. Nobody did. General Victor Dunn stood on the observation deck of the constellation and watched his dream take shape. Below him, floating in the darkness between Mars and Jupiter, was the largest shipyard humanity had ever built. Thousands of workers moved through zero gravity, welding armor plates and installing weapon systems. The constellation herself was already complete. She was 3 times the size of any council dreadnought. Her weapons could crack a planet. Her shields could survive a sun's fury. She was beautiful and terrible. And she was just the beginning. "General," said Dr. Claire Bennett, walking up beside him. She was small and quiet, with glasses that seemed too large for her face. But her mind was sharper than any blade. "The new drive systems are ready for testing. If my calculations are correct, we'll be able to cross the galaxy in half the time of any council ship." "If your calculations are correct," Dunn repeated with a slight smile. "Have your calculations ever been wrong, Doctor?" Claire thought about it. "Once, in graduate school, I miscounted the number of coffee cups on my desk." Dunn laughed. It was a rare sound from him these days. There was too much work to do, too much time lost to recover. The council had kept humanity small for too long. Now they were catching up. The isolation had been hard at first. Trade routes closed overnight. Technology that humanity had depended on suddenly became unavailable. Economists predicted collapse. Politicians screamed about disaster. But something unexpected happened instead. Humanity adapted. They always did. The colonies that had once relied on alien goods learned to produce their own. The scientists who had studied council technology now took it apart and rebuilt it better. The soldiers who had served in alien fleets now trained their own people with knowledge gained from years of watching and learning. Admiral Kevin Walsh commanded the new First Fleet. He was old for a military man, past 60, but his mind was sharp and his will was iron. His daughter Sophie had just graduated from the academy. She would serve on one of the new ships, part of a generation that had never known anything but isolation. "Sir," said his communications officer, "we're receiving the latest patrol reports. Still nothing from beyond the border." Walsh nodded. "Good. Keep watching. The council will come eventually. They always do." On the colony world of New Montana, Staff Sergeant Tony Vega pushed his recruits through another day of training. They ran through mud and climbed over walls and fought with weapons set to stun. They were young. Most of them had been children when Earth walked away from the council. "The galaxy thinks we're weak," Vega told them as they lined up for inspection. "They think we're primitive. They think that without their guidance, we'll destroy ourselves." He walked down the line, looking each recruit in the eye. "They're wrong. Humanity has survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly ended us. We survived because we never give up. We never stop fighting. We never stop growing." He stopped in front of a young woman named Private Amy Ortiz. She was small but fierce, with eyes that burned with determination. "When the day comes," Vega said, "and that day will come, we will show the galaxy what humanity can do. Not because we want revenge. Not because we want power. But because we deserve to stand as equals among the stars." The recruits stood straighter, their eyes hardened with purpose. Back on the council station, strange reports were beginning to arrive. Ships near human space detected sensor ghosts. Objects that appeared for a moment and then vanished. Energy signatures that matched nothing in any database. Captain Drevak of the Velthrani Patrol Fleet reviewed the reports with growing concern. "These readings make no sense," he told his crew. They suggest ships moving faster than anything we can build, but that's impossible. Should we report this to the High Speaker? His first officer asked. Drevak considered it. Zorvan had made his feelings about humanity very clear. He did not want to hear about them. He did not want to think about them. Any officer who brought up the human question was quickly reassigned to less important duties. No, Drevak said finally. It's probably just sensor errors, old equipment, nothing more. He was wrong. The ghosts were real. Human ships were testing the borders, pushing deeper into Council space with each passing month. They were learning the patrol routes, mapping the defense systems, preparing for a day that was coming faster than anyone expected. In her laboratory on Earth, Dr. Bennett completed her greatest work, a weapon that could change everything, a device that could reach across space and touch minds themselves. The quantum disruption field is ready, she told General Dunn. If we ever face a hive mind species, this will tear their connection apart. It was small, no larger than a suitcase, but it hummed with power that made the air taste like metal. Let's hope we never need it, he said. But both of them knew that hope was not a strategy. The galaxy was dangerous. Threats lurked in the darkness between stars, and humanity would face those threats alone. President Marcus Webb sat in the Oval Office and reviewed the latest status reports. The economy was strong. The military was ready. The people were united in a way they had not been for generations. We're as prepared as we can be, said Secretary of State Patricia Long. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Webb nodded slowly. The Council will contact us eventually. They'll want something. They always want something. And when they do, the President looked out the window at the blue sky of Earth. Somewhere beyond that sky, beyond the atmosphere and the moon and the outer planets, humanity's new fleet waited in the darkness. When they do, he said, we'll remind them that we are not the species they dismissed 5 years ago. We've grown, we've learned, we've become something new. He turned back to his secretary. And this time, we'll be the ones setting the terms. The isolation years were ending. A new chapter was about to begin, and the Galactic Council had no idea what was coming. The distress call came from Thraxis Prime at midnight, Galactic Standard Time. Within an hour, the entire Council was in emergency session. Within a day, the galaxy had changed forever. Councilor Marathon stood before the chamber and delivered the news that nobody wanted to hear. Her voice shook as she spoke. Thraxis Prime has fallen. The Kethmari homeworld is under attack. The enemy numbers in the millions. We are facing extinction. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates screamed at each other. Some demanded action. Others demanded answers. A few simply sat in shock, unable to process what they were hearing. The enemy had a name that turned blood to ice. The Vorn Swarm. They came from beyond the galactic rim, from the dark space between galaxies where nothing should live. They were not one species, but millions, all connected by a single hive mind that thought only of consumption. They did not negotiate. They simply ate everything in their path and moved on to the next meal. The Council had known about the Vorn for decades. Old records spoke of ancient civilizations that had vanished overnight, leaving only empty worlds and strange markings. Scientists had theorized about what could cause such destruction, but theories were not preparation. And now the Vorn were here. High Speaker Zorvan took command of the response. The Velthrani fleet, the greatest military force in the known galaxy, would stop the Vorn at the Nexus system. Other species would provide support. Victory was certain. It was not. The Battle of Thraxis was a massacre. The Velthrani fleet outnumbered the Vorn 3-1. But numbers meant nothing against an enemy that felt no fear and knew no pain. Vorn ships crashed into Council vessels like missiles. Their soldiers crawled across hulls and tore through armor with bare claws. They died by the thousands and kept coming. Admiral Vestron of the Velthrani commanded from his flagship, the Pride of Velthra. He was the greatest military mind his species had produced in a century. He was also completely unprepared for what he faced. "They're not stopping," his first officer reported. "We've destroyed over 10,000 of their ships, and they're not stopping." "Then we destroy 10,000 more," Vestron replied, but his voice held no confidence. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Velthrani fleet had been cut in half. Admiral Vestron was dead, his flagship torn apart by a swarm of Vorn boarding pods. The survivors retreated in disorder, leaving Thraxis Prime to its fate. The news hit the Council like a physical blow. The Velthrani, the most powerful species in the galaxy, had been defeated. Not just defeated, humiliated, broken. And the Vorn kept coming. Within 3 months, 12 systems had fallen. The Kethmari homeworld was a dead rock, stripped of all life. The Osirian Collective had lost 2 colony worlds, and was preparing to evacuate a third. Refugee ships clogged every major travel route, carrying billions of terrified civilians, fleeing from an enemy they could not stop. Counselor Marathon watched the latest reports from her office. The number of dead had stopped being a number and become a statistic. Billions, tens of billions, more every day. Her aide entered with a communication device. "The Council has reached a decision," he said. Marathon knew what the decision was. She had argued for it herself, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. She activated the device and began recording a message to humanity, a message that she never thought she would have to send. "To the government of United Earth, this is Counselor Marathon of the Osirian Collective, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Council. We request, most urgently, your assistance in our current crisis. The Vorn swarm threatens all life in the galaxy. We cannot defeat them alone. Please, help us." She paused, struggling with words that her pride made difficult to speak. "We know that we have not treated your species with the respect you deserved. We know that we made mistakes. We are asking you to set those mistakes aside. For the sake of all living things, please help us." The message was sent. The Council waited. The response came 3 days later. It was brief and cold. Foreign Minister Alan Bradley appeared on every screen in the Council chamber. His face was calm. His voice was steady. "We received your request for assistance. The United Earth government has considered the matter carefully. We remember how we were treated during our time in the Council. We remember the votes against us. We remember being called primitive and dangerous. We remember being told that we needed guidance and control." He paused. "We see no reason to risk human lives for species that wanted us caged in our own system. We see no reason to spend human resources defending worlds that considered us beneath notice. We see no reason to help those who would not help us." The message ended. The chamber was silent. Zorvan's feathers shook with barely controlled rage. "They dare refuse us? After everything we offered them, those ungrateful primitives." "We offered them nothing," Marathon said quietly. "We took from them. We controlled them. We treated them like animals that needed to be trained. Is it any wonder they won't help us now?" On the border of human space, Lieutenant Commander Sophie Walsh monitored the refugee ships that appeared every day. Thousands of vessels carrying millions of beings. All of them fleeing the Vorn. All of them desperate. No alien ships were permitted in human space. Turn them back. Do not engage. But Sophie watched a transport ship carrying Osirian children. They pressed their faces against the windows, staring at the human patrol vessel with fear and hope in their eyes. She made a decision that would have consequences. "Open a channel to Earth Command," she said. "I'm requesting permission to provide humanitarian assistance to civilian refugees." The request was denied, but it was noted, and it added to the growing debate on Earth about what humanity should do. President Webb called an emergency meeting of his cabinet. The question was simple: should humanity help? General Dunn argued against intervention. We spent 5 years preparing for this moment, not to save them, to save ourselves. Let the Council face the consequences of their arrogance. Secretary Long argued for it. If the Vorn consume the Council, they'll come for us next. We have to decide now how humanity responds. We can fight them now, alongside allies, or we can fight them later, alone. Dr. Bennett offered a different perspective. I didn't build weapons to watch them rust in storage. If we can stop the Vorn, we should stop the Vorn. Not for the Council, for ourselves, for the future. The debate lasted 3 days. Arguments went back and forth. Old wounds were reopened. The memory of every insult and every restriction was raised and examined. In the end, President Webb made his decision. We will help, he said, but not as saviors, not as servants. We will help as equals, and the Council will accept our terms, or they will face the Vorn alone. The message was sent. The terms were clear. Full recognition of human sovereignty, equal voting rights in a restructured council, return of all territories that had been claimed from human space, and a formal public apology from every species that had supported the restriction mandate. The ball was in the Council's court now, and the Vorn were still coming. High Speaker Zorvan had never felt so small in his entire life. He stood in the reception hall of Station Unity, humanity's newest outpost on the edge of their space. Everything around him was a reminder of how wrong he had been. The walls were lined with displays showing human achievements. The guards wore armor more advanced than anything the Velthrani had built. The station itself was twice the size of the Council's main diplomatic hub. 5 years ago, he had called humanity primitive. Now he was here to beg for their help. Admiral Kevin Walsh kept him waiting for exactly 1 hour. Not long enough to be openly insulting, just long enough to make a point. When he finally arrived, he walked into the room like a man who owned it. Because he did. High Speaker, Walsh said. His voice was polite, but cold. Thank you for making the journey. Zorvan forced himself to bow. It was a gesture of respect that Velthrani only showed to equals or betters. It physically hurt to perform it for a human. Admiral Walsh, he said, I come as a representative of the Galactic Council. We have received your terms. And? Zorvan felt his feathers twitch with anger. The human was not making this easy. But then, why should he? The Council had made nothing easy for humanity. The terms are difficult, Zorvan said carefully. Full sovereignty is acceptable. Equal voting rights can be arranged. The territorial adjustments are complex, but not impossible. He paused. The next part was the hardest. The public apology presents certain challenges. My species has never apologized to a younger race. Our culture does not have a framework for such an act. Admiral Walsh's expression did not change. Then I suggest you build one. Commander Diana Price stood beside the Admiral. She had been present when humanity walked away from the Council. Now she was here to watch them return. There was justice in that. High Speaker, she said, you called us primitives. You said we needed guidance. You voted to cage us in our own system like animals. Do you remember that? Zorvan's throat tightened. I remember. Good. Because we remember too. Every single vote. Every single insult. Every single time we were told that we didn't belong among the stars. She took a step closer to him. You're asking us to send our sons and daughters to die fighting your enemy. You're asking us to spend resources we spent 5 years building. You're asking for help that you never would have given us. Her voice hardened. The least you can do is say sorry. A hologram flickered to life in the center of the room. Counselor Marathon appeared, her silver face showing signs of exhaustion and stress. High Speaker, she said urgently, we don't have time for pride. The Vorn have taken the third moon of the Sura. My people are dying by the millions. Whatever the humans want, give it to them. Zorvan looked at the human admiral. He looked at Commander Price. He thought about his species' pride and their traditions and everything they believed about themselves. Then he thought about what would happen if the Vorn reached Velthra, his homeworld, his family, everything he had ever known. "I accept," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "All terms, unconditionally." Admiral Walsh nodded slowly. "The apology will be broadcast galaxy-wide. Every species that supported the restriction mandate will participate. This is not negotiable." "I understand." "And the Council will be restructured. Humanity will have an equal voice in all decisions. No more votes where we have no say." "Agreed." "Finally, you should understand something." Walsh leaned forward slightly. "We're not doing this for you. We're not doing this because we forgive you. We're doing this because the Vorn are a threat to all life, including human life. When this is over, we will remember how we were treated. We will be watching. If the Council returns to its old ways..." He let the threat hang in the air. Zorvan nodded. He had no words left. The agreement was signed within the hour. Messages went out to every human fleet. The isolation was officially over. Humanity was returning to the galactic stage. But not as the species that had walked away 5 years ago. Lieutenant Commander Sophie Walsh received her new orders aboard the border monitoring station. She read them twice to make sure she understood. All ships to proceed to Rally Point Delta. Prepare for joint operations with Council forces. The war has begun. She looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere beyond those lights, the Vorn were consuming entire worlds. Soon, human ships would be fighting them. Human soldiers would be dying. Her father would be leading them all. She thought about the refugee ships she had watched for months. The frightened faces, the desperate pleas. The Council species had done terrible things to humanity, but their children were innocent. Their civilians had never voted for anything. Maybe that was enough reason to fight. On Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Humanity was going to war, not for conquest, not for revenge, for survival. Dr. Claire Bennett supervised the final loading of her quantum disruption devices onto the fleet carriers. Each one could tear apart a hive-mind connection. Each one could turn the Vorn's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. "Doctor," said General Dunn, approaching her. "The President wants to know if you're sure this will work." Claire adjusted her glasses. In laboratory conditions, the device performed perfectly. In actual combat conditions, she shrugged. "We'll find out." "That's not very reassuring." "I'm a scientist, not a fortune teller. I deal in facts and theories. The fact is that the device works. The theory is that it will work against the Vorn. We'll test the theory soon enough." Dunn smiled slightly. "At least you're honest." Captain Tony Vega gathered his soldiers on the deck of the transport ship that would carry them to the front lines. They were young. Most of them had never seen real combat. But they had trained for this moment. They were ready. "Listen up," Vega said. "We're about to do something that nobody expected. We're going to save the species that tried to cage us. We're going to fight for the people who called us primitive." He looked at their faces. Some showed fear. Some showed anger. All showed determination. "You might wonder why. You might think we should let them burn. Part of me feels the same way." He paused. "We're not doing this for them. We're doing this for us. To prove that we're better than they are. To show the galaxy that humanity doesn't abandon people in need, even when those people don't deserve our help." Private Amy Ortiz stood in the front row, her weapon held tight against her chest. "When this is over," Vega continued, "the galaxy will remember what we did. They'll remember that when the darkness came, humanity stood up to fight it. Not for reward, not for recognition. Because it was right." He raised his fist. "Earth and humanity, 1,000 voices answered him. Earth and humanity. Across human space, engines fired and ships began to move. The fleet assembled in the darkness between stars, larger and more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Walsh stood on the bridge of the constellation and watched his fleet take formation. "Send a message to the Council," he said. "Tell them we're coming." Commander Price nodded. "What should the message say, sir?" Walsh thought for a moment. "Tell them the humans are here. The real work begins now." The message was sent. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, and across the galaxy, the Vorn had no idea what was coming for them. The Battle of Nexus Station would be remembered for 10,000 years. Admiral Kevin Walsh stood on the bridge of the constellation and looked at the enemy that had consumed a dozen civilizations. The Vorn fleet filled the entire view screen. Ships beyond counting, millions of soldiers connected by a single mind, a hunger that had never known defeat. Until today. "All ships report ready, Admiral," said his communications officer. Walsh nodded. "Signal the fleet. Hold formation until my command." Beside him stood Captain Tony Vega, promoted after his heroics in the early skirmishes. He had led the boarding party that recaptured Nexus Station from Vorn scouts. Now he commanded the Marine forces aboard the Constellation. "They're bigger than I expected," Vega said quietly. "They always are," Walsh replied. "But so are we." The combined fleets stretched across space. Human ships formed the center, their sleek hulls gleaming with new armor and weapons. Council ships filled the flanks, their designs older, but still deadly. Together they numbered over 5,000 vessels. The Vorn had 25,000. Dr. Claire Bennett sat in the Weapons Control Center, deep within the constellation. Her quantum disruption device hummed with power. Everything she had built, everything she had worked for, came down to this moment. "Device is ready," she reported. "On your command, Admiral." Walsh's daughter, Lieutenant Commander Sophie Walsh, led a squadron of strike fighters at the front of the formation. Her call sign was Spectre. She had earned it during training, when instructors said she moved through combat zones like a ghost. "Spectre Squadron, check in," she said into her comm. 12 voices answered. 12 pilots, ready to fly into the heart of the enemy. "Stay tight. Watch your wingmen and don't get dead. We have a galaxy to save." The Vorn made the first move. A wave of ships broke from their formation and rushed toward the Allied fleet. Thousands of vessels moving as one, controlled by a single mind that felt no fear and knew no hesitation. Admiral Walsh watched them come. "All ships, hold," he ordered. The Vorn closed the distance. 10,000 kilometers, 5,000, 1,000. "Now," Walsh said, "activate the disruption field." Dr. Bennett pressed the button. The device released a wave of energy that expanded outward at the speed of light. Invisible, silent, and absolutely devastating. The effect was immediate. Vorn ships that had been moving in perfect formation suddenly scattered. Some collided with each other. Others stopped completely, drifting without purpose. The hive-mind connection that made them so dangerous had been torn apart. For the first time in recorded history, the Vorn hesitated. "All ships, attack," Walsh commanded. The Allied fleet surged forward. Human weapons fired first, plasma beams and mass drivers that tore through Vorn ships by the dozen. Council vessels followed, their older weapons still deadly against an enemy that had lost its coordination. Lieutenant Commander Sophie Walsh led her squadron into the heart of the Vorn formation. Her fighter twisted and turned, avoiding debris and enemy fire. Around her, the chaos of battle filled every direction. "Spectre 2, watch your left," she shouted. Her wingman banked hard, avoiding a Vorn interceptor that would have destroyed him. Sophie locked onto the enemy ship and fired. It exploded in silence. "Thanks, Spectre 1, her wingman said. "Keep moving. We have hive ships to kill." Each one was a nexus point for the Vorn consciousness, a node that controlled thousands of smaller vessels. Destroy enough of them, and the Vorn would lose cohesion completely. Sophie found her first target, a hive ship the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons and surrounded by defenders. Her squadron formed up behind her. "On my mark," she said, "attack pattern Delta." They struck like lightning. 12 fighters moving as one, weaving through defensive fire, targeting the weak points that intelligence had identified. Sophie fired her missiles at the perfect moment, watching them streak toward the hive ship's reactor core. The explosion was beautiful and terrible. A second sun bloomed in the darkness of space, consuming the hive ship and everything around it. "Hive ship down," Sophie reported, moving to the next target. Across the battlefield, the tide was turning. The disruption field continued to pulse, preventing the Vorn from reforming their hive-mind connection. Human ships punched holes in enemy formations, while council vessels held the flanks. It was working. But the Vorn were not defeated yet. A massive wave of enemy ships broke through the Allied lines and headed straight for the constellation. Admiral Walsh watched them come. All defensive batteries, fire at will. Launch all remaining fighters. Captain Vega stood ready with his Marines. "Admiral, if they board us—" "Then you stop them," Walsh said simply. The Vorn crashed against the constellation like waves against a rock. Boarding pods latched onto the hull. Enemy soldiers cut through armor and poured into the corridors. Vega met them with fire and fury. "Hold the line," he shouted. His soldiers formed a wall of weapons and determination. Vorn fell by the hundreds, but more kept coming. Private Amy Ortiz stood beside her captain. She had never killed anything before today. Now she had lost count. Her weapon was hot in her hands, her armor scorched by near misses. "Captain, there's too many," someone shouted. "There's never too many," Vega replied. "Keep fighting." On the bridge, Admiral Walsh made a decision. "Target the main Vorn command ship. All weapons, everything we have." The constellation turned toward the largest Vorn vessel in the fleet. It was the heart of the swarm, the central node that coordinated the entire invasion. Destroy it, and the Vorn would be broken. Fire! Every weapon on the constellation spoke at once. A beam of pure destruction crossed the void and struck the command ship. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship exploded. The effect rippled across the entire Vorn fleet. Ships stopped fighting. The hive mind that had controlled them all simply stopped. Silence fell across the battlefield. Lieutenant Commander Sophie Walsh watched from her cockpit as Vorn ships drifted without purpose. The connection was gone. The enemy was defeated. "All ships, cease fire," Admiral Walsh ordered. His voice was tired but triumphant. "The battle is over. We won." The aftermath took hours to process. Casualty reports came in from every ship. Hundreds of human vessels destroyed. Thousands of lives lost. The Council fleets had suffered even worse. But the Vorn were broken. Their invasion was finished. The galaxy was saved. 3 days later, a ceremony was held on Nexus Station. Representatives from every Council species gathered to honor the dead and celebrate the living. Admiral Walsh received the Council's highest medal. His daughter stood beside him, her uniform still showing marks from battle. Captain Vega and his surviving Marines were recognized as heroes. Dr. Bennett was given credit for the weapon that made victory possible. High Speaker Zorvan approached the podium. His feathers were flat against his skull, a sign of submission that every species in the galaxy understood. "I speak for the Velthrani," he said, "and for every species that once treated humanity as lesser beings. We were wrong." He turned to face the human delegation. "We saw your youth and called it weakness. We saw your passion and called it barbarism. We feared your potential and tried to cage it. Today, we learned the truth." His voice broke slightly. "Humanity saved us, not because they owed us anything, not because we deserved their help, but because it was right. They showed us what true strength looks like. It is not the power to destroy, it is the wisdom to protect. He bowed, lower than any Velthrani had ever bowed to another species. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I apologize. We were wrong. You are not our subjects. You are our equals, perhaps our betters. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, applause began to build. Council delegates rose to their feet. The sound grew until it shook the walls. Nathan Cole, now old and gray, watched the ceremony from Earth. His granddaughter, a newly commissioned ensign, sat beside him. "Was it worth it, grandfather?" she asked. "All those years of isolation, all the lives lost?" Nathan thought about everything that had happened. The walking away, the building, the waiting, the fighting, the winning. "The galaxy will never again make the mistake of underestimating us," he said. "Our children will grow up as equals, not as subjects. Yes, I believe it was worth it." His granddaughter nodded. She would be serving on the Constellation soon, part of the new joint fleet that would patrol the galactic rim. A new generation, born into a galaxy that finally respected humanity. On the station, Admiral Walsh shook hands with Counselor Marathan. "What happens now?" she asked. Walsh looked out at the stars. Somewhere beyond them, more threats waited. More challenges, more opportunities. "Now we rebuild," he said. "Together, as equals." Humanity had withdrawn from peace talks, because peace without dignity was no peace at all. They had spent 5 years in isolation, growing stronger, while the galaxy learned the cost of their absence. Now they had both. Peace and dignity. Strength and respect. The galaxy would not soon forget the lesson, and humanity would never let them.